Hi, it's Jerry Roberts, and back with another conversation with a community leader about how they are handling, managing, and surviving the pandemic. We're delighted to be joined today by District Attorney Joyce Dudley. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. I always love talking to you.
Well, that's the first rule of political reporting is never get sideways with the district attorney. So,
Okay.
So let me ask you first about your health. Are you okay? How's everybody in the office? Everything going okay there?
I'm incredibly healthy, and the office is incredibly healthy. We had one employee who a few weeks ago tested COVID positive, and she's back at work. So otherwise, we're great.
Great. Okay. And what kind of, what's your personal social distancing protocol? Are you working from home most days? Are you in the office or what?
It's a combination. Every Monday and Friday, I'm in the office, and I also happen to be in the office today. My general rule is if I can do it from home, I do it from home to protect the community. If it's something I need to be at work for, I just go to work. But I've been able to bike to work every day since this started, and it's been great to be able to use my bicycle, and because it really gives me, as the district attorney, a sense of our community when I'm actually biking down State Street versus driving. So that's been a pleasure.
That's cool. And what about your Wonder Woman workouts? What are you doing to
Well,
take care of that?
it's one of, yes, I'm continuing the Wonder Woman workouts. I like that term. I never used it. This morning I got up, I started heading off my workout at 5:45. So I was able to enjoy a 2-hour hike and watch the sunrise.
Nice.
And then I'll go for a bike ride later.
All right. Okay, I got a bunch of issues I want to get into, but let me just ask kind of the meta issue here first. How would you summarize, what's your perspective on how the COVID-19 crisis has affected the criminal justice system?
It's heartbreaking in so many different ways. Certainly justice delayed is justice denied, and justice has been delayed for 8 weeks. So whether it's a criminal justice case that needs to be resolved or a civil matter that needs to be resolved, the fact that a critical part of our system has put its brakes on and stopped means that people are suffering from that. And then, of course, the death, illness, being away from our family, that all has an effect on all of us, and public health.
Hey, where'd you go? There you are.
I went away. I'm back. I'm gonna put my battery charger on now. Okay, battery charger on.
And put it a little higher on your head. That's a beautiful painting, but I'd rather look at you.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Rather look at that than me?
No, there you go.
Me and the painting. Okay.
Right. So, so being away, and of course, there's no jury trials going on, correct?
Correct. There doesn't appear to there's no chance of a jury trial through, at least, I believe the latest ruling was mid-June, and then it could be extended beyond that.
So have your office had to deal with like a lot of motions to get people out of jail who are awaiting trial and so on?
A few of those. And what happens is we get a list from probation, and they say these are the people we're thinking either should get out because of the new zero bail rule, or any other. That's mostly what we hear from probation. There's been a new rule, the zero bail under these circumstances. These are the folks that fall into that area. What is the district attorney's position on that? And for many of them, we agree it fits that category. And then for many of them, we disagree, and we file motions, and those are heard in some capacity, and the court decides who should stay in and who should get out on the zero bail.
And are all of those proceedings being done virtually? Are they all on Zoom?
Interestingly enough, I believe many of them are just court research attorneys and the court, meaning the judges, making decisions, because there's a criteria. It basically has to go to the standard of safety for the community. And those are the issues that we argue in those briefs. Okay.
All right, let me ask you this. On March 13th, Friday the 13th, I am informed and therefore believe that you had a meeting with your executive staff
I did.
to talk about, how are we going to deal with all this? What are the implications? What are the issues that we're going to have to? And one of the things that surfaced the most, or was a concern, was what you call in-home crimes. What are in-home crimes, and why is that a serious issue that you're concerned about?
In-home crimes are domestic violence, spousal rape, child abuse, elder abuse, and animal abuse. And as we thought about what are the ramifications on Santa Barbara County, who are we not going to have eyes on? It's going to be people behind the door of their homes. And under normal circumstances, kids go to school, people walk the streets, people see their family, people get to grocery stores without masks on. A whole bunch of things happen so that when there is some concern about any of the categories I just described, somebody reports it. Well, now all the mandated reporters and all the just people who care about you, reporters, aren't seeing those victims. The other piece is that the stress level in many homes is off the chart. It's off the chart because of the financial burdens that people are now facing, because children are home from school, because of fear of getting the disease. Maybe some people have lost loved ones, maybe other loved ones are in the hospital. So their anxiety is up, the stress is up, and alcohol and drugs are nearby because they're home. So the combination of those three things led us all to believe that we had to be particularly concerned about in-home crimes.
So you were concerned that this set of circumstances would lead to a substantial increase in these kinds of crimes, but you really had many fewer tools for how to deal with it. This piece you wrote for American Lawyer, I think? Many of us become lawyers in order to feel we could have some control over life's predictable but seemingly uncontrollable moments. And then along came this unpredictable and uncontrollable moment, which made us feel at times quite powerless, an emotion we lawyers hate. So how did you noodle around about how you were going to deal with it?
Interesting, because what we knew is I've been in the district attorney's office for just about 30 years, and everybody else sitting around the table, the other 7 executives that I work with collectively were at a couple of 100 years. We all knew these crimes would be increasing. The problem is we all knew the reports would be decreasing. And interestingly enough, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, it was yesterday or a couple of days ago, and unfortunately, it was accurate. I'll read you this phrase. Across the country, from California to Iowa to Massachusetts, child abuse reports have plummeted since the virus arrived. In the nation's capital, hotline reports of abuse and neglect between mid-March and mid-April were 62% lower than in the same period last year, according to the DC Child and Family Service Agency. Reports to Child Protective Services in Maryland have fallen just as far. And in Virginia, referrals from school staffers have dipped by 94%. So we knew these horrible crimes were happening, and we also knew we weren't getting the reports to these incredible statistics. So when I read this yesterday, I wasn't surprised, but my concern deepened. So what we knew we had to do was we had to be proactive, and that's what I've done over the last 7 weeks.
What do you have any data either in the county or statewide in California that parallels that?
In my office, I've certainly seen a decrease of cases coming over from law enforcement. And when I've met with my law enforcement colleagues, the sheriff and the other police chiefs via telephone, people have said that no, they have not seen an increase in this. And that's what worries everybody. About 7 weeks ago, I got on the phone with the sheriff and all the other chiefs. I explained my position and why I felt this was going to be happening in Santa Barbara County. To a person, they agreed, and to a person, they committed to making this the highest priority. But now it was a matter of, okay, we know it's happening, and yet we're not getting reports. So how do we stop it from happening? And that's when we began the campaign that I've been involved in the last 6 weeks.
Talk a little bit about what that campaign is. I know.
Well, the first thing is once I became aware of it, I wrote to Tom Bolton over at Newshawk, and I asked him if I could write a piece for Newshawk, and he immediately said yes. And that's when I first started to present my ideas about the level of concern.
So you
Then
went to the competition, is what you're saying here.
Sorry, I didn't know I could write a piece for you, Jerry. Otherwise, I would have.
Anytime, anything. Go ahead.
Then I contacted Greg Hart, and I asked if I could be part of his press conferences that he was having to talk about this, and he said, of course. Then when I was discussing with Megan Riker, the person in charge of our victim advocates, I said, how are we going to give people another safe phone number to call? Because some people, for a variety of good reasons, anxiety reasons, don't want to call 911, but they fear something's happening or something's happening to them. So we created a 24/7 hotline so that victims or witnesses of any of these in-home crimes could reach an actual bilingual advocate 24/7 through the district attorney's office. So we made that.
What's that hotline?
805-568-2400.
805-568-2400. Okay.
They can call us night or day, Saturday or Sunday. A person who is bilingual will answer the phone and we'll be able to give them some help. Then I decided to contact the fire chief and the sheriff and say, how about, because we are the faces of public safety, the three of us do a press conference on this? Immediately, Mark Hartwig, Bill Brown said yes. So we had our own separate press conference. And we talked about the idea, if you see something, hear something, sense something, do something, make that phone call. Call 911 or call the district attorney hotline.
And that's directed really more towards neighbors and family members, because I guess often in cases like this, people are afraid to reach out themselves, or they're so intimidated, or they think it's going to stop, or any number of reasons.
Jerry, it's exactly the two reasons you just said. They're either intimidated, they fear this for the sake of their life, for the sake of their children's lives, for the sake of their pets' lives, for their elders' lives. They fear if they make that phone call, something horrible will happen. That's one. And two is that neighbors just don't want to get involved. And so the only chance we have is if people step up, if friends, family, and neighbors make those phone calls. And then occasionally we do hear from very brave victims. And again, it's going to get the top priority in our criminal justice system.
And what's been the response to it? Have you heard from people?
Yes, and we've kept it going. I also appeared on a radio show talking about it, and then the sheriff's department created a flyer which talks about if you see something, hear something, say something, child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, and then made copies of those, put them all around, and then I contacted Food Bank, and I said, would you be willing, if we can give you 5,000 copies of these flyers, would you, in bilingual, one side's English, one side's Spanish, would you put them in the boxes and the bags of the people that are receiving this food? Because maybe sometimes a victim or a witness will see that and will say, okay, here's the number I can call, and they'll tuck it away. And then when there's a safe moment, they can do that. And on March 12th, 10 members of the district attorney's office are also going over to Food Bank to help with the packing of the boxes and the bags, our way of appreciating them for using the flyers.
May 12th. Not
correct.
March. Yes.
Not March. I keep doing that. I think I want to go back to a time where none of this was real.
Have you read about liminal time, how we're all living in liminal time, liminal tracing to the word limbo? So we are neither here nor there. We're only in the eternal present, and it's a cognitive problem that we're struggling with as well as physical. Yeah, it's.
I'm going to have to Google that when you and I get off the phone. The last piece of what I've been up to is I've been a member of Prosecutors Against Gun Violence, which is a national organization. I was just
going to ask you about that, because you won't hear anywhere else. You're giving the opening address to the Prosecutors Against Gun Violence Zoom meeting this week, correct?
I am. It's what happened was we've been doing these Prosecutors Against Gun Violence, not Democrats, not Republicans, just prosecutors throughout the country. Cy Vance in Manhattan, Mike Fuhrer down in Los Angeles, Detroit, Seattle. We get together and we pick an issue like domestic violence and gun violence, or juveniles and gun violence, or drugs and gun violence. And we focus on that, and we have a conference, and we invite people throughout the country to learn more about mental illness and gun violence. And we got a phone call, and Mike said, he's the city attorney for LA, do you guys think we should do a virtual conference? And somehow, Jerry, I don't know where I get this from, I decided to pipe up, 50 prosecutors from around the country, and somehow Joyce Dudley. I know he's back. I was shocked too. I was actually walking along the beach when I just said, I'm going to have to speak. And I said, I think the most relevant things, in-home crimes, dead silence. Mike says, well, tell me more about that. I tell him about it. And then he says, does anybody disagree with Joyce? And that never happens, Jerry. And none of the prosecutors on the line disagreed. And then he said, let's do it. Let's do this conference that Joyce is suggesting. And Joyce, why don't you make some introductory comments at the conference so that we can discuss these issues. And different DAs from different places. The Brooklyn District Attorney is handling child abuse, and many others from around the country will be handling really important topics. And then we're getting national experts as well, because you can't get these national experts with a year or two notice, but they're all walking around their penguin pajamas now looking for something to do. So they're doing it.
So gun violence adds a whole nother layer to this.
It does.
This circumstance and conditions that you described for people. Let me back up a minute.
Sure.
So just in terms of privacy, because we do have a long history of privacy rights here, it really seems like that's sort of a rights in conflict kind of situation here from a law enforcement perspective. Because something could be going on behind closed doors, or you get a call. What's the balance there? What's the legal balance there?
That's a really great question. And it is at the heart of where we are. Because when I think about us as Americans, we hold dear our ability to our right to privacy. We hold that very dear. The other thing we hold dear is we love to help our communities. We love to step up and help someone. So you're absolutely right. Your term was perfect. We're at a conflict because we're not going to violate anybody's right to privacy. If we don't have a warrant and they don't want us to come in, we can't come in. We have to have an exception to the warrant requirement, or we have to have a warrant if someone denies us entrance into their home. But by the same token, we so want to help them. And so the only thing we can do is to keep communicating with friends and neighbors and family members and saying, if you're concerned about something, let us know. Then we can stop at someone's house and do what's called a check for welfare and get in there and see if we can help.
So getting to the threshold of check for welfare, is that a lower threshold than a warrant, or you need a warrant to do that?
Well, what you can do is you can check for welfare, knock on the door, boom, boom, boom. And it's not just law enforcement, social service agencies. It's many people who want to make sure that people are okay in our community. And if the circumstances rises to an exception to the warrant, which would be an exigent circumstance, probably because there's some kind of concern, something they see, something they hear, something they smell, then all of a sudden the warrant can go out the door and you can just go in there. But you have to have a warrant or an exception to the warrant requirement.
Got it. Let me ask you this. Have you seen much increase or what is the level of fraud? Are there like COVID-19 scams that are going on?
There are COVID-19 scams. Some of them are just absolutely despicable. Like, take this and you won't get COVID-19. Some of them are lightweight despicable. Like if you don't have trouble holding your breath for 10 seconds, you don't have COVID-19. And you get this person who looks like an expert saying things like that. So when this first started, a lot of people, including myself, got caught up in it. But then you can go to Google and you can search out these opinions, these scams, these videos, and you can find out what's true and not true. Now, in terms of economic scams, what you think of in terms of price gouging and people taking money for unjust reasons, we have a list of those on our DA website. And you just go right there and you can see price gouging and you can see the latest scams. I think in general, this it's going to be the same as it's always been. Don't give anybody your Visa card. Don't give anybody your Social Security number. Just don't do it.
Well, I didn't know that about the Social Security number. I got it. Oh, okay.
Oh, yes, you did.
All right. So on this question of the jail and folks being released, I know you don't run the jail, but you are involved in the process of determining who gets released or who has been released because of the coronavirus, who is continuing to be held. Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. My biggest involvement has been who gets out because of the new rule that the presiding justice signed about the no bail. We get that list. We're very involved in making those determinations. But in terms of who gets released from the jail, that really is the sheriff's area, because he looks at the crime, someone's background, and makes a decision. And also he can look at whether someone was going to get released in 45 days. Do we release them now versus 30 days versus 21 days? So except for one case, I haven't been involved in that part of it, but I've been very involved in releasing people without bail.
Okay, so they don't send you a thing that says, we're thinking of releasing this person who's being held for homicide. What do you think? And you weigh in on that?
I can't ever remember ever getting an email saying we're thinking about releasing someone on homicide. I can tell you that, of course, there have been mistakes with the computer program, and there may have been somebody was on the no bail list who may have been charged with attempted homicide or homicide, but we resolved those pretty quick.
All right. And you're not aware of anyone who has been released who has then committed a further crime or been arrested for it?
I am not, but I've certainly read the articles about other parts of the country where they are. And that's going to be one of the discussions in our, Prosecutors Against Gun Violence meeting. Cy Vance, the Manhattan District Attorney, is going to talk about the effect of early release. I mean, it's another one of those quandaries, because you don't want anyone to be in the jail and get sick. And that was not part of the punishment. The punishment was, we're going to separate you from society. You're going to be punished, and then you're going to get out again. So that's something that the sheriff does consider. And I know he's reduced the jail to maybe a little over 900 to a little less than 400. So he's been very thoughtful about that. By the same token, we can't risk public safety. The public is already so much on edge that to release violent offenders into our community is just unjust.
Yeah, well, so much of this catastrophe, calamity, crisis, whatever you want to call it, is a balancing act. It's like, okay, we got to protect public health, but we can't kill the economy. And
Right.
here you're saying that the jail population has been decreased by several hundred. I mean, maybe those people didn't belong in jail in the first place. I mean, what's your take on that?
No, I think my take on it is the people who were in jail belonged in jail, and they belonged in jail for at least the amount of time they were in jail. They committed crimes, and I'll tell you, the victims of those crimes don't believe they should have gotten out early, by and large. But the other piece is, okay, let's talk about that. So we have people quarantined, and the financial burden that's placed on the people of Santa Barbara County. That's a form of public health crisis too. And then you add to that the people that are being exposed to the in-home crimes, domestic violence, spousal rape, child abuse. That's affecting public health too. So as you've said a couple of times now, this is quite the balancing act. How do you keep people alive and well? And that's what our county and state and federal government have been balancing.
Some balancing better than others.
Yes, I agree.
So the courts have been closed, basically, and I just want to read you something Judge Eskin sent me. I'm going to be talking to him about this tomorrow. I guess there's something called a legal futurist. I don't know what a legal futurist is, but anyway, legal futurist Richard Susskind has long advocated for a shift in thinking. Courts aren't a place, but a service. When we think about courts as a service rather than a place, it's much easier to conceptualize technology-driven or facilitated dispute resolution. In fact, it's hard to think about returning to the status quo with a rigid expectation for physical presence and an overly complex process built serving a place rather than serving justice. Are we seeing the future here in what's happening with our courts now?
That's such a great question. Are we seeing a future here in terms of everything? And every time I ask really smart people, be it Ron Werft from Cottage Hospital or Ralph from Rescue Mission. I mean, these are people whose minds I really admire. And I say, what do you see a week from now, a year from now? And then when I turn it on to myself, which I try to do some reflection, I think, well, Joyce, have you changed? When all this ends, are you a different person? And if so, that's probably a good way to start thinking about whether the world's a different place. And I think we're still in the muck, and it's too hard for us to know that. But I'd love to think that we're going to come out of this better and stronger. Right now, I'll give you the best analogy I could. I've heard someone call this the great pause. And when I hear the words great pause, I spell that P-A-W-S. And I think of the pause that are beating people and causing domestic violence, and the pause that are holding down rape victims, and the pause that are hurting children and the elderly and animals. So the great pause in my mind is those crimes that are happening behind closed doors. So where all this will end up, I just hope we're better as a result of this.
One thing we do know, whenever things get back to quote unquote normal or whatever, we're able to circulate in society again. And before that, there's going to be a big whack to the county budget in terms of decreased revenue. What is your forecast of how that's affecting you? What are the kinds of increased costs that you're going to have, and tell us what your perspective is on that.
Most of my costs, close to 90%, if not even more than that, is personnel costs, and I won't need to hire additional personnel. I'll be asking my personnel to work harder and longer hours, and I know the people of the district attorney's office, and they're going to step up and do that. I don't know of other costs that will happen to us. Now, if we get cut, then that's going to be a problem, because caseloads will increase and then things will slip through the crack, and then I'm worried about public safety.
Well, there's going to be a big backlog of cases, is there not, when we come out of it?
We're ready for that. My people have been getting the cases. Many of them are working from home, but they're taking their cases home. They're working on their cases. They're writing briefs. They're calling detectives. They're calling the victims. And so they're continuing to work on the cases. And I assume there will be some backlog, but I think that they're really prepared for that.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just ask you, let me go back to the personal again. What's been the strangest thing about this whole experience for you?
Well, as you well know, my husband died about 17 months ago. So I haven't had a hug in 7 weeks from anybody. I think that's just such a silly thing when I think about all of the other things that people are going through. But, I have these beautiful grandchildren I can't touch, my sons. And I think sometimes during my worst moments, I go to exercise and talking to friends, but sometimes you just need a hug. And we're a society now that unless you have a spouse and you're home with somebody, you're not getting the hugs. So I think that I miss them the most on a very personal, very selfish level. But I think the first hug I get is going to be so sweet.
Yeah. Socially distanced grandchildren is not.
No.
Come on.
I saw my granddaughter at a distance, and she said, Nona, my tooth is loose. Feel my wiggly tooth. And I said, I can't, sweetheart. Right now I can't, but I'll look forward to the day that I can. I mean, something as simple as feel my wiggly tooth. Who thought that was ever going to happen, right?
And you wonder what effect it's going to have on kids. I mean, it's huge.
Kids are great. Kids bounce back. Grandparents, I'm not so sure.
All right. All right. Joyce Dudley, District Attorney for Santa Barbara County, thank you so much for spending time with us, and look forward to that hug.
Hey, Jerry, just a quick thing. I get your emails, and then I watch the shows, and I read the stories, and I hang on to your every word. I have so much respect for you as a journalist, and I really appreciate the fact that you've continued to work during this crisis.
Well, thank you. That's so nice of you.
It's true.
If we were in normal times, I'd say, Joyce, you got to get out more, but you can't, I can't tell you.
Or else you'd say, hey, Joyce, I want to give you a hug. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.